So students had to create a portfolio using their work from the year. We talked about this earlier. And so what I allowed them to do, because this was kind of an informal one, because I was doing it for the very first time, was they created a title page. I gave them the option of one, or they could create their own. And then I allowed them to go through, and instead of being formal about their reflection pieces to it, they could actually go in and just use sticky notes and explain what they chose and why they chose it, and what they believe that they brought away from it with. So they chose pieces that either I had made specific comments on, or that they had rewritten, or things that they felt reflected them and reflected their knowledge and what they learned. And then they started with beginning of the year pieces and went all the way through. And then they also were able to put in like artwork and pieces where they reflected on different things that they read and be able to talk about all of that. And then we did little things with like pieces like this was from the yellow wallpaper, where they had to write a reflection about what they did, why they did it, how it represented the piece, and all of that. Then they also did things like they did mosaics for a piece that they did over Christmas. And so they had to give me the theme, they had to give me a motif, they had to give me the character, they had to have symbols and specifics, and then they also did a writing reflection that they turned in separately from the mosaic. And then we broke apart poetry, because you have to do that on the test. And then these are like examples of close reads and how to do that, and then what that helped with and how that helped them break that down. And then we did diary and journal entries for different reading pieces, like when we did fences, and so there's this option. And then we also did a reading journal over All the Light You Cannot See, where they had to take the specific standards for this particular area of study, and then they had to reflect on that particular standard using a journal entry, using a specific area of the book that they had to talk about. And then we also did a couple places where they could have chosen, they didn't have to, but they could have chosen, where we did thesis statements and where we broke apart different pieces of writing, and then students were able to go through and write their own thesis statements, add to thesis statements, and different things like that. Kind of what we did. And so they decided they wanted to put it in as formal as a written piece versus they could have done it digitally, or they could have done it on paper. And so they decided they would rather do it on paper. So they asked me for copies of different things, and we did lots of printouts and all of that. So that's how we ended up doing. So then it becomes a reflection piece, but it also becomes a piece for them to use when they head off into the real world, and reminders of how to do things when they get to college. So that's what we do. So next year, we're going to start with a summer reading program. Their summer reading for AP. They have to read Their Eyes Were Watching God, and they'll have to do a major works data sheet, and then they'll have to do a reflective journal that they have to keep with it. Once they do that, that's their second book of the summer, because that's what we will walk into doing in the beginning. So we start with Socratic seminars. We start with, there'll be some quizzes and some vocabulary and different things that they'll have to do with Their Eyes Were Watching God, and they'll have to do a reflective essay over it. They don't do an essay over the summer, specifically because they've never seen the rubric, they've never seen any of those kinds of things. So they'll get all of that information, and then they'll do their very first essay for me will be over Their Eyes Were Watching God. But to go along with the portfolio piece this summer, what I've done is they have a work that they can choose, and it is from the last 7 years of AP books. So that I've compiled a list of all of the works that have been on that AP will release to us. And so they know what we'll be doing as a class, and so they're told not to use those books, but then they can choose anything else off of that. So they're going to have to do a portfolio with that. And so in that portfolio, they have to choose a theme. And then for that theme, they have to do theme statements. They have to do paragraphs explaining that theme, and then they have to choose 3 different works that they believe also connect with that work and that theme. So they can use art, they can use music, they can use theater, they can use poems, they can use a short story, or they can use any type of podcast or multimedia piece that they can find. And then they have to write a reflection on that. And so that portfolio piece will tie in next year with the rest of the year. And so they'll have to do that as we continue throughout the rest of the year, and they'll have to add to it. So big major works that we do next year, they'll have to choose works that I don't choose to add to and go with that, and then they'll do a reflection at the end of the year after they choose their pieces. So that's how it's going to change over next year.
And I like the casual reflection rather than a very what's it called? Very structured reflection, because I feel more freely to be able to put all my thoughts into words rather than having to pull specific, in the text right here where I wrote in this part of my essay, I didn't like such and such. I can more so talk broadly about the piece, and it kind of makes the whole thing feel like less work and less pressure, which is really nice when you're at the end of your senior year and you're kind of over.
Yes, everything. I also liked how we got the pick. I like how you kept it semi-smaller so we wouldn't have to use all of our essays. I like that we only had to do 3, because then we got to go around and pick I really like how this one shows my growth, or if we really hated one essay, we wanted to sweep it away, we wouldn't have to include that one. Because I know what I did, I used one of my first few ones that was awful, one that was semi-awful but a little bit better, and then one that I was kind of proud of, and I liked how I got to see that growth. I like getting to choose, especially in all the other categories.
I got work I hate in.
Throw in my poems and stuff. You let me do that, which I was really proud of.
And then only add commentary at the end of the year, because I think, or add commentary from the beginning of the year and then go back and write new commentary.
Oh yeah, that'd be cool.
That'd be cool to see how your thoughts and opinions have changed on your work based off of your newfound experiences and what you've learned.
Obviously, when you first do your first few essays, you're not going to be oh yeah, that's really going to show my growth until after at the end of the year, whenever you've grown and you have the work to prove it. Okay.